Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
And thank you for the kind introduction and for the honor of participating in this important day in the lives of everyone in this room, especially the lives of these graduates. Though I've never served in the military, I've been covering military operations for years, and I come here today to share some stories I've gathered along the way. They all are different, but somehow all the same. I rarely tell them, but they are part of what defines me. In 1985, I was on patrol with Nicaraguan Contran rebels fighting to overthrow the Sandinista government. We were in the tropical highlands of that Central American nation, and the Contras had set up an ambush. We waited for Sandinista army forces to walk into the trap. A peasant boy turned guerrilla fighter pulled out a small pocket Bible and began to read the 23rd Psalm. Aunque pase por el valle de sombra de muerte, no temeré mal alguno, porque tú estás conmigo. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Soon enough, the jungle would explode, and young men would begin to bleed. In 1991, I stood before dawn on a landing strip with members of the 101st Airborne Division. For months, we had waited in the Saudi Arabian desert to invade Iraq and to return Kuwait to its citizens. The 101st was to lead the attack and cut off Saddam Hussein's forces before they made it back to Baghdad. I would join them on the first wave of the invasion. The sun punched up over the horizon, burning off the morning chill. The division's helicopters sat waiting, their blades drooping down, nearly touching the tarmac. They looked like giant, sad insects. One soldier listened to a transistor radio. It was the BBC. And I heard the announcer say what we all knew was coming that morning. In his thick British accent, the announcer said, quote, "The onslaught has begun," close quote. In 2008, I joined the 24th Marine Expeditionary Unit in Afghanistan's Helmand province in a major offensive along the border with Pakistan. For weeks, I documented the Marines as they fought Taliban rebels and returned towns and villages to their rightful civilian owners. And they did so in temperatures that topped 120 degrees. These stories I've gathered while practicing our craft since 1977. They've taught me much about war and peace, about the value of journalism, about me. You now belong to the small core of men and women who create the visual record of military history, of history itself. The visual record that you create will impact all who see it, and it will, as with me, come to define you. From the jungles and back alleys of Central America to the conflicts in the Persian Gulf, Iraq, and Afghanistan, to far-off places where languages, faces, and cultures are different, I've always felt privileged to document and to record history. And in that sense, you and I have much in common. We are wired differently than most others. In the late 1990s, I was on assignment for National Geographic Television in the Sahara Desert. And I was filming cave drawings made thousands of years before. These drawings depict animals and vegetation that no longer exist in that part of the world. Bison, tall trees and grass. They're just not there anymore in the Sahara Desert. And it occurred to me then that the people who scrawled those images on stone were among the original visual storytellers. They are my, and now your, predecessors. And like us, they must have felt a need to document their reality, their stories, their lives. Perhaps they felt this would extend their own mortality. If they managed to leave behind some record of their lives, then their lives would somehow reach beyond their own death to the lives of others. So what does this mean for this class of new visual communicators? It means that tomorrow's videos, tomorrow's documentaries, and perhaps most importantly, tomorrow's minds will be filled with some of your stories and your images. Stories and images that you pass on to future generations. What extraordinary power, don't you think? What an extraordinary privilege. Edward R. Murrow, the CBS correspondent who covered the German Blitz, the bombing blitz of London during World War II, once delivered a now famous speech on the power and the promise of television. At the time, television was the newest vehicle of visual communication. This, in part, is what Murrow said. Open quote. This instrument can teach. It can illuminate. Yes, and it can even inspire. But it can do so only to the extent that humans are determined to use it to those ends. Otherwise, it is merely wires and lights in a box. There is a great and perhaps decisive battle to be fought against ignorance, intolerance, and indifference. This weapon of television could be useful. Close quote. And this is in 1958, before the internet, iPhones, and Facebook had infiltrated all of our lives. But I would take Murrow's argument further. I would argue that this useful weapon, as he called television, and now, of course, other vehicles of visual communication, not only can inform, instruct, and inspire, they can also misinform, destruct, and demoralize, perhaps even more efficiently than some of the weapons you've been so well trained to use. So with the extraordinary privilege of practicing our craft comes extraordinary responsibility. In the 1980s, when I was working as a correspondent for United Press International, I was interviewing the spokeswoman for the Guatemalan Human Rights Commission. She was describing a rash of human rights violations in her country. And at the end of the interview, I asked her, okay, how should I source this? And she said, you can use my name. And I said, are you sure? Is that safe? She insisted it was safe. But later, as I was writing the piece, I thought, maybe I shouldn't use her name after all. This was a time when Guatemalan death squads routinely killed politicians, journalists, union organizers, even priests. So I did not use her name and instead sourced the information to someone associated with human rights issues in Guatemala. The piece went out on United Press International's wire. Nothing special happened. A few months later, the same woman was quoted in an American newspaper that identified her by her name as the source of the information. And just days after that story appeared, unidentified gunmen opened fire on her car on a highway outside Guatemala City. They killed her 19-year-old son who was driving and abducted her. She was Irma Flaquer. To this day, her body has yet to be found, and Irma Flaquer is the subject of a book titled Disappeared. I don't know that the publication of her name was the cause of her disappearance. What I do know is that our subjects, our sources, are our most valuable assets. And too often, like Irma Flaquer, they are the most vulnerable, the most defenseless, and perhaps the most unaware of exactly where that thin red line between safety and peril might be. So use the skills that you've acquired here with great care. Your contact with the people you cover becomes your real recompense as you practice our craft. This contact is your privilege and your responsibility. As you begin your new career, you will stand on the shoulders of some of the most talented, most brave men and women who ever have practiced the craft, like Edward R. Murrow. But the privilege of practicing the craft can come with a heavy price tag. The personal cost that our profession exacts can be high. There is a direct and powerful link between the experiences you accumulate and the impact these experiences have on your psyche. Particularly in the coverage of conflict, the more you witness, the more you document and experience, the less and less in common you have with your contemporaries, especially your civilian contemporaries. While your experiences become part of who you are and broaden you as a person, the cumulative effect is to isolate you from the people around you, even from family and friends, because you have fewer and fewer shared experiences. So don't be disappointed or angry when you come home from long, tough assignments that the people around you only want to discuss the most recent football game. It's not their fault. On the contrary, you should expect it. It is fashionable these days to criticize the media. Though you now join the ranks of military as opposed to civilian media, you will not be immune from criticism. From the safety and comfort of their air-conditioned offices, the critics attack us for the work we do. And sadly, I think we sometimes are tempted to tailor our work to satisfy one group or another, or to simply go with the flow. But listen to Tom Brokaw, former anchor and managing editor of NBC Nightly News, who spoke at a graduation ceremony not unlike this one. Open quote. "We seem to be caught in a cycle of easy and cheap distraction. Celebrity has been at once devalued and raised to an artificially high place in our popular culture. Never mind achievement or worth that stands the test of time. A moment in the spotlight of television is life itself for dysfunctional families willing to share their sordid secrets on daytime talk shows, for performers to reach even further into the universe of the outrageous to make an impression, for producers and editors to succumb to the easy temptations of titillation rather than intellectual provocation." Close quote. Once again, we hear warnings associated with our craft voiced by some of its most respected practitioners. So, those are my stories for today. I also have a few words of advice, and they are: never, ever, ever give up on the pursuit of truth. Unlike accolades from friends and colleagues, unlike fame and fortune, the truth will never let you down. Even though that truth may be hard, cold, and ugly, having told it will comfort you. Go now and gather your own stories. Go define yourselves. Good luck and stay safe. Thank you.